Hi, it's Drew again from Andover Baptist Church with the fifth and final instalment of this week's 5-day devotional series. So far this week, we've looked at who Jesus was, that he was a refugee as a child with his family, that he was a Nazarene from a humble town of Nazareth, that he was a carpenter before he took up his ministry, and that he was a religious Jew. Today we look at Jesus was, and Jesus is, God. During lockdown, I watched a movie. It was set in India. It was a rags to riches story, and the young man, the protagonist of the movie, was explaining the religious makeup of his country. He explained that Hindus had 33 million gods. However, the Muslims in his country, they just had one, whereas Christians, they had 3. Well, that stopped me in my tracks. What does he mean by 3? Perhaps it's the outward perception that the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit are different, whereas we know as Christians that there is just one God. You know, very early on in the Old Testament, in the book of Deuteronomy, there's an incredibly important verse. And it's Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. And it says this: "Hear ye, O Israel, the Lord our God is one." Now, we know God doesn't change, so we know God is still one today. Not 3. But sometimes, as a Christian, it's hard to get your head around how Jesus was, on one hand, 100% human, and on the other hand, 100% God. That's a difficult concept. But when we look at it, Jesus the man, we see that he walked in our shoes. He walked on this earth with all the trials, tribulations, temptations, and challenges. And so he can connect with humans at that level, and that comforts me. I believe perhaps it was also that human element that cried out to God, his Father in heaven, whereas the divine element of Jesus was the element that was all-knowing, that could create the miracles that we're aware of in the Bible, and that could see him rise from the dead 3 days after his brutal crucifixion. What a unique God we have. What a special God that came to earth to suffer like us and for us. The New Testament, I believe, really clarifies this position. I'm not a theologian. I read the Bible just like anyone else, I suppose, in our faith. But the book of John, the Gospel according to John, really shouts out to me about Jesus being God. There's a couple of verses I'd like to share with you. One of them, and there are many, but one of them is where Jesus is comforting his disciples. And he's explaining that the way to the Father is through him. And Philip, one of the disciples, said to him, "Well, if you show us the Father, then that'd be great." And Jesus says this to him in reply in chapter 14, verse 9. "Have I been with you so long, and yet you have not known me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. So how can you say, 'Show us the Father'?" And there you have it. Another wonderful story is around doubting Thomas, the famous doubting disciple, who wouldn't believe Jesus was risen until he physically saw him. And when he did, Jesus invited him to put his hand into his wounds. When Thomas did this, he said in John chapter 20, verse 28, "And Thomas answered him, 'My Lord and my God.'" There was Thomas clarifying that Jesus was in fact God too. Finally, for me, like I say, there are many examples, but one I particularly like is John chapter 10, verse 30. This was while Jesus was being challenged by the religious leaders of the time, the Pharisees. He said to them, "I and the Father are one," in chapter 10, verse 30. I'm not going to argue with Jesus. It's clear that our God is one God. And so our friend in the movie set in India was clearly wrong. And that encourages me and makes it simple and clear. And I hope it does for you to some extent. Thank you for listening to me this week. I hope it's been encouraging, and I hope some of it made sense. I'd like to leave you with a song by the artist Steph McLeod. It's called "Jesus is Lord." Thank you, and God bless.